Hey everybody.
Hello.
Thank you all very much for coming today. I'm James Ernest. I'm a game inventor. I think a lot of you know that. One of you has my name on your shirt. Please stand up and show the assembled group how everyone should be dressed. Today we're talking about a subject that is close to my heart, game design, specifically traditional and abstract game design. So we're going to talk about what I think that means and some of the tricks that I use to get myself in the right headspace to design games in this space. So let's begin. Like I said, I'm James Ernest. I make a lot of games. This is about 65 of them. I actually cannot count these. I've tried so many times. But I've been making games since 1993 professionally, since the age of 5 as a hobby. And I tend to like to design games in the casual space. I think of myself as a pretty lazy gamer, and I grew up playing those most traditional games that we all know. And so I think of my audience a lot like that, and I try to keep them looped in. Short rule books, easy rules, and so forth. What we're going to talk about today specifically is a little bit about what I think the game designer's job is, a definition of the category traditional and abstract games, just so that we all sort of feel like we're in the same place. Some core design principles that I think really apply to everything, but may apply specifically to the categories that we're talking about. Some tools and techniques for iteration and development, although I also have a talk later in this series more about iteration. We'll touch on some of that today. And then I want to talk about a game you might have heard of, which is TAC, a game that's done very well in this space, traditional abstract game that was first described as part of a fantasy novel that later we had to sort of bring to life for real. So I'll talk about some of the topics with relation to specifically that game. So I have a straw man question for you. What is the game designer's job?
To entertain the player.
Okay. To entertain the player, right? To design games is a little too self-destructive, right? Self-descriptive.
Design the space of possibilities that the player participates.
Yeah, I like that. We're going to talk about that a lot. I think it sounds a little analytical when you put it that way, but I put it that way. What I like to say is the game is not the rules. And to extrapolate on that a little bit, games are the only art form in which you have to learn something new to engage with each one. If you went to the movies and you sat through a 20-minute lecture about the language of cinema, about how a crossfade means a change in place or time, you would be like, stop, make it stop, right? But we put up with this in games because that's the only way to fully enjoy the experience. And so it's easy to mistake the rules, because they are necessary, as being the game. And I'm here to tell you the game is not the rules. The game is the experience that we are trying to create, that the rules help us have. But in my opinion, the rules are more like a barrier to that experience than the experience itself. So our job is to create experiences. What the game is the choices that people make once they understand what they're supposed to be doing. It is the things that happen to them that make the story happen. Their path through the game makes sense because they understand the mechanics, but the mechanics really are just a way for them to go through the experience. It's the stories you tell about the game, and if it's a really good game, it's like a destination experience in real life, like Disneyland. You talk about Disneyland before you go, you have fun while you're there, you talk about it after you leave. Really good games do all of that too. They are destination experiences. You will talk about them when you're not playing. That means you really got in somebody's head. So ultimately the game is the reason that you play. So what are we talking about today? What's a traditional abstract game? Everything is a gray area, nothing is a perfect box. But some things that define these traditional games, I've got traditional on one slide, abstract on the next. We're really talking about sort of one thing, but a traditional game has simple rules. Like above everything else, first and foremost, simple rules. Rules that are easy to explain, rules that are easy to pass down without ever reading a rule book. That's a big challenge. How did you learn the first games you learned? You learned them from your family, you learned them from your friends. You probably didn't even read the lid of the box. I know my mom never read the rules to Monopoly because she played it wrong, because we all play it wrong, because it's a game that you learn through oral tradition. Simple components, meaning very little in terms of language on the components, very little in terms of localizability. You know, the 8-ball doesn't say sink me last, you just have to know that. And partially that's because the 8-ball is good for a whole bunch of other games where that's not true. Language neutral. The complexity in these games is not in the components or the rules. The complexity in these games arises from iteration. As a designer of these kinds of games, iterating on the system again and again. I don't mean play testing, I mean what you do when you play the game. Every time you take an action, you're changing the system a little bit, and the complexity in the game state arises from all the different ways that those changes can manifest in the game. So here's some examples. If I was thinking ahead, I would have asked you to give me examples, but here we go. These are the things that I think of in the category of traditional games. Chess, Go, Mancala, Backgammon, Poker Hearts, Uno, Connect Four, Othello, and Battleship. And those last four, those are brand names that we know, but they came from existing traditional games prior to being brands. Abstract games are, they're not theme free. In fact, a lot of abstract games have a very obvious theme. We describe chess as an abstract game, but it's two kingdoms at war, obviously. It's just that that metaphor only helps you remember a tiny amount of what's going on, and you don't really need it. When you talk about abstract strategy specifically as a term of art in this hobby, you're typically talking about games that don't have a lot of hidden information. They don't have a lot of random information. So again, chess is our example, but it is the strategy part of the game that appeals to us, not the randomness of it. There may be no randomness at all. So there's our Chess and Go and Mancala Connect 4 again. But abstract, in a broader sense, can include random elements. So Backgammon, Can't Stop, Azul, they're also sort of in the abstract game category. Again, they find themselves here because they are mostly themeless, not necessarily because they're pure strategy. This is an important question to ask yourself. I ask myself this question all the time. Why am I doing this? Not because there's 1,000 games in this space already. That's not the point. The point is, I'm not doing this to make money, because traditional abstract games usually make terrible retail products. I find myself either giving them away or finding a partner with an IP that's already got a lot of value and making the game popular through the value of that IP. Why we do work in this space is that simple games are inclusive. Everyone can play them. The language neutrality and the simplicity and the non-gamerness of these games makes them playable by people who do not self-identify as gamers. And for me, that's a big deal. Right? I know what gamers are like, but I know there's also people. And those people also like to play games, even if they don't identify as gamers. But the kind of games they like to play are pretty darn simple. The kind of games we're making, if we're talking about these traditional style games, these 400-year-old games, they survive in the marketplace of memes, on transmissibility. There are rules you can pass on verbally. That's why they're so darn simple. If they get too complicated, they sort of fall apart. You can't teach another set of players if you can't write down the rules. There's two kinds of things that nobody writes down. Things that never happen and things that always happen. The Royal Game of was so popular, we don't know how to play it because nobody wrote down the rules because everybody knew how to play. So when that word of mouth chain breaks down, the game dies. The reason that they're not great retail products is that once I put the rules out for this game you play with a checkerboard, you can just play it with a checkerboard. I don't have anything to sell you. Like, I can sell fancy chess sets because chess is super popular, but selling a brand new abstract game that has almost no novel components is not a smart strategy at retail. It is a great design challenge, though, because working in a space this small is harder than working in a bigger space. When you're new to game design, adding is super easy and subtracting is super hard. And the reason that the abstract games, the traditional games that we know have survived as long as they have is because they have been ground down to that most important core that's good about the game, and they've just shed everything else. And it's hard to do that like on purpose. Complex games that dominate the marketplace. If you go to a retail store, you're going to see all the sort of modern hobby games that we think about as gaming. I try to tell new designers, don't always think of your product as a retail product. You may just want to make a game. The demands of the retail marketplace are a whole extra level of challenges on top of writing a good game. And it's easy to mistake them for the same thing when all you know about is the stuff you see in the store. So yeah, the question of how am I going to manufacture this game, how am I going to sell this game, those questions are largely irrelevant if you're not going to do that, and you can make plenty of games where that's just not a consideration. Complex games dominate the marketplace because as a manufacturer, these games are harder for other people to copy. I make a thing that no one else can make. I make a pirate ship game out of polystyrene because the molds for those or the dies for those are $10,000 a piece. They're easier to protect. Intellectual property is easier to protect through patents and copyrights and just the marketplace in general, identifying you as the originator of the idea when they have that sort of a hobby game feel. Also, expansions make money. If I've got a patron who loves this game, I'm going to sell it to them again and again and again and again as long as they still have money in their pocket. Can't do that with chess. It's been tried. Chess players don't want expansions. They want pretty pieces, but they don't want more rules. Something else about complexity that makes it dominant in the marketplace is that complexity creates a sense of ownership. Once you've learned how to do a thing, you actually enjoy teaching other people how to do it. If you're hardcore, you even enjoy other people not understanding what you're trying to tell them. I see this even with a game like craps. People who love craps love explaining all the complicated betting schemes that they've thought up, and when people's eyes glaze over, they're like, ah yes, I'm smart and you don't understand this. It's like the cryptocurrency of gambling games. So there is a certain amount of ownership that comes from, I am a Magic player, I know the ins and outs of this better than anybody else. I'm super good at it and it is my game because of that. It's harder to get that with a less retail friendly product. Let's talk about some core design principles because that's what my slide is telling me to do. I have 3 fictional universes that I make games in, and in one of them I said it's bad luck to play a pub game without a coin on the table. Then I forgot which universe that applied to, so now it just applies to all 3. So every time I play a game, make sure I've got a coin on the table for good luck. Because game designers create experiences, the first place you want to start with your new game design may be to define the experience you're trying to create. It's not necessarily in terms of specific mechanics or rules or even theme. It is, how does my player feel? What do they do when they are playing this game? Is this a game about bluffing? Is this a game about planning? Is this a game about getting lucky? Like, these are things players do in different games. And if you sort of have a picture of that experience, it's easy to relate what you're making to an existing game. It's easy to make a version of a game you already know. But we're talking about, how do you really start? If you have to start from scratch, what are you talking about? You can, again, you can relate it to a thing you know, or you can say, okay, this is the very basic player experience I want to have. For example, I recently did a gambling game called, I don't have this in the notes, so I'm extemporizing here. Powder Keg. Powder Keg is a gambling game where one player has a hand of cards and no one else does. And they're all betting on what's in the hand. And the reason I wanted to make this game was I saw a picture in an RPG of one player with a big hand of cards and a bunch of bets on the table and nobody else has cards. And I said, what is that? What the hell game is that? So this is a game where the dealer has to set the hand by very specific rules and then reveals it one card at a time, and the players have to guess at what point the hand becomes corrupted, has a pair or whatever. I'll explain it in the video. But that sense of, okay, the dealer has the cards and no one else has anything and they're still all making bets, like, okay, that's the flow of the game I'm trying to make. Now how do I do that? Project goals are similarly not mechanics or themes or retail price. They're more about, again, the sort of the feeling or the experience you're trying to make. With abstract games specifically, with traditional games specifically, describing the game states, describing how many different permutations these pieces can be put in that is a legitimate place the game can go to is a big deal. Because you are trying to work with a minimum set of components. The more versatile that set of components is and the more different game spaces you can get to, the better your game is going to be. It's not a matter of details on a specific card, it's more about permutations of the basic ingredients. Meaningfully different paths through that game state is relevant because you can have a lot of different things that aren't meaningfully different. If I ask you to pick a number between 1 and 100, and then I flip a coin that's either worth 0 or 101, your pick isn't relevant, even though you had 100 different picks, you're still, no matter where you go, you're 50-50, right? So there's different game states and then there's meaningfully different game states. And that's kind of the difference we're talking about. Maximizing the value of each piece does as much work as possible. It doesn't mean that each piece is as much work as possible. It doesn't mean a lot of text on a single card. It means a lot of different things that a single piece can do. And coaxing variability from the fewest rules. This is kind of a lot of ways of saying the same thing, but that's the idea. So, same shit, bigger slide. Know your design goals, describe the player's story, what happens to them or what do they do in the course of the game. And those are two different things. A strategy game feels like something you do. A luck game feels like something that happens to you. Usually games have a mix of both. A strategy game usually, we can do a pure strategy game. There are plenty of pure luck games as well, but they still have stories. And does a player feel smart? Do they feel challenged? Do they feel fun? Are they laughing? Are they here to get drunk and throw some money around, or are they here to think really hard? And something else, specifically to TAC, but I think of any game, when I do a new abstract game, I try to understand the world that game belongs in, because it is an artifact of that world, and there are going to be things about that world that influence the availability of pieces. Do they have printing in this world? Is everything block printed, or do they have 4-color printing? What kind of pieces might they have for the playing pieces? And also what story elements from the world can wind up as kind of background in the game. Jumping ahead to TAC, one of the things in the Kingkiller Chronicle in that world are these ancient megaliths, standing stones that are all around the world, and some of them are old enough they've fallen over. They all designate roads, and so the ideas of roads and standing stones that have gone flat is from the story and the world of the game, becomes part of the game mechanics. So what is a good design goal? I use this example a lot, even though I cannot find the reference for it. I saw it in someone else's presentation, and it is attributed to Yamaguchi, Katsunori Yamaguchi, the designer of Gran Turismo, and I put maybe on there because I'm not 100% sure. I couldn't find this reference. But the point of the story is, he did not set out to make a driving game with a lot of details. Obviously, Gran Turismo has a lot of cars in it and a lot of details and a lot of game mechanics, but it all comes down to this high concept. When you bring me a new piece of this game, because I'm working in a big team in this case, you bring me a new idea for this game, I'm going to filter it through that design goal. And if it makes me feel good, I'm going to try to keep it in. And if it feels extra, I'm going to take it out. When you get too deep into the details of your game, you get into the micro levels of the game mechanics. It's hard maybe sometimes to analyze a new suggestion as appropriate or inappropriate to the metaphor or the meaning of the game, the goal of the game. If you can distill your goal to something this simple, you have that filter to say, this sounds good, this sounds bad. It's much more important when you're working with a big team, because you can have team members pulling in opposite directions if they don't see this at the top of the board. So what would have been a good design goal for poker if we were designing poker today? I joke with my friends that if we produced poker as a retail product today, we would call it busted the social game of showdowns. And it might have something like this. Players use their wits to outsmart each other's and build their bankroll. It's got something in there about playing for money. It's got something in there about being smart. It's not necessarily about having the best hand, is it? It's about being the best player. And poker players feel smart when they do the thing, when they win the money by outsmarting each other. We probably wouldn't say something like, players have hands of 5 cards, there's a betting round followed by a draw, there's another betting round followed by a showdown. Those are the rules of poker, but that's not what it's about. That's like saying the rules of Disneyland is they open at 8 and they close at 11, there's fireworks and you can't carry liquids. Like, that's not what Disneyland is about, those are the rules. And so that's why I feel like if you try to use your game mechanics as a summary of what your game is, you may not be able to convey that very well. Let's talk about game state with a little more detail. The game you're trying to decide, all games have this, but if you're designing an abstract strategy game, this is like the core center focus. It should have a variety of meaningfully different game states. The game state is the position of all the pieces in a snapshot in time. Where are all the pieces on the chessboard? Could I legally have even got to this position? Once I'm here, is this meaningfully different from this other random assortment of chess pieces? If it is, your game has a lot of strategic depth and the game state has a lot of diversity. If those game states, while visually different, are kind of meaningfully the same, then you still have some work to do. And by that I mean that a player's story from this point forward is going to be different for each one of those game states. Yeah, what I said. Again, we're talking about maximizing the values of few pieces that you have, making a piece do a lot of different jobs in a sense, but in a simple sense, because it's going to be the combinations of those jobs that give you that emergent behavior from a small set of rules. Iteration is the key. You're going to operate on this system a lot of times. You're not just going to read a card and do what it says and move on to the next turn. Everything you do to this situation is going to change the game state in a meaningful way. Imagine making chess moves, making go moves, even making moves in Mancala. Each move changes everything about the game state in a meaningfully different way. In the right environment, this is what we learned from chaos theory, right? Simple rules applied over and over can lead to infinite complexity. The Mandelbrot set lives on the complex plane. You can take one equation, operate on it, and make that pretty picture by drawing how long it takes for something to skedaddle away from the core. Chess only has 6 different pieces, but it's got uncountably huge number of moves, right? Chess absolutely satisfies this desire for multiple game states from minimal pieces. And this is actually a snapshot from John Conway's Life. Who knows that game? So, for those who don't, John Conway's Life is a 0-player game. It is a set of rules for dots in a grid. If there's too many dots in a place, that dot dies. If there's not enough dots, that dot dies. If there's just the right number of dots, that dot multiplies. And that shape right there is a glider. If you let this system operate on that shape, that little shape will keep copying itself and run down the edge of the page. You can build computers. In John Conway's Life, it has 4 rules and no players. This is what I mean by iteration, because those computers require millions and millions of turns for those complex behaviors to emerge. How do I maximize the design space with a minimum number of pieces? My first rule is yes is usually better than no. If I say, here are all the things you can do, but here are all the times you can't do those things, I'm chopping off huge pieces of my game space because I'm a kid on a playground and I think I need to make some rules about some stuff, right? You often rule out things that seem like bad decisions. Sometimes you rule out things that seem overpowered. But if you make too many restrictions, you're going to limit the number of available game states, and that's hurting you when you only have a limited number of pieces. So the first thing I say is don't take out the easy decisions. Blackjack doesn't force you to hit on a total of 8. I know a lot of game designers who would say that's a dumb decision, so let's take it out. But my argument is the easy decisions are breadcrumbs teaching me how to make the hard ones. When I decide whether to hit on a 12, I'm making the same decision about the game as when I decide to hit on an 8. So it's not going to be, oh, the rules tell you have to hit. It's going to be, I get to decide. Every time I get to decide. With the 8, it's easy. With the 12, maybe not so much. So allow players to make bad decisions. Don't make bad decisions against the rules. Part of the randomness in chess comes from people not playing perfectly. I'm going to go to a weird place in a chess game with a new player because he's going to make moves I've never seen before. And while I will beat him, it will be in an unusual way at least. I wish I could say that. I'm terrible at chess, by the way. I wish I could say that it was true about me. I'm the bad player taking you to a weird place. Also be aware of outlawing something too strong. You're still cutting off big parts of the game space. And yeah, you don't want to just let someone take the straight path to the victory, but ask yourself, why is that path there? If the power move is too strong, you may be able to find a way to make it available and not too strong, rather than just writing a rule against it. And remember, every rule you write is cognitive load. Everything I have to remember about how to play this game from the rules is going to keep me from learning how to play this game from the fun side. And cognitive load is a huge cost in any one of these games, especially when you're going to take many, many, many turns, because a little 4-second decision compounded over 400 turns turns into 10 minutes. How did I do? That's a total guess. It is a big deal because you have to do it so many times. I say this about graphic design as well. If your card was just 10% easier to read, if I have to read it, 20 times in a game, well, you just saved me 2 minutes. Please do that. Please make the decisions easy. Please don't put in special rules that are hard to remember or rarely come up. Keep the stuff that I use all the time and that gets me to the right place. Okay, let's make a game. When you're making a game, I've said this earlier, but adding more rules, adding more complexity, a patch for a thing that's not working, a new rule that makes up for another rule that wasn't working, that's easy. That's just throwing more ingredients into the soup. Taking stuff out is a lot harder. This is a discipline you have to learn. These traditional games that we know are not the only games people ever played. They're just the ones that survived. And that's because the ones that went into a bad place, people stopped playing, right? But you can't add too much to one of those games or it's going to fall apart. It's not going to transmit from one generation to the next because it's too hard to remember. That's why these games have the feel that they do. Because being traditional, they're passed on by word of mouth, and you only have this many rules before that starts to fall apart. But I think for all games, subtracting is better. It's harder, but it's better. Taking out stuff that isn't working is better than leaving it in and patching it with even more. Every improvement to these traditional games turns into a replacement, not an addition. I know there's exceptions to this. Everything that isn't working just gets thrown to the wayside. And a line that's not here is if it is a good enough variant, it becomes a separate game. That certainly happens all the time. There's taxonomies of games that sort of trace lots of games back to common roots, but each one of those descendants still has kind of minimum DNA. The games I'm talking about, the traditional games of yore, did mostly evolve in this way. As game designers, we can make that happen. We can do the same thing but with intent, knowing that that's the tradition, that's the process by which it works. Almost like asking people to remember the rules instead of letting them write them down. And there's a quote from a French guy, "Perfection is achieved when there's nothing left to take away." I'd had a look at your rock, paper, scissors game, and I think I can get it down to just rock and paper. Something else to remember in the design space, specifically in games like this, here we have an abstract game that we want to expand. We want it to be as broad as we can make it in terms of possible game states. But what's wrong with that picture? Maybe the game doesn't end. So trending to conclusion is one of the things you want to keep on your checklist. How does this game take care of itself? How do I keep this game from just spiraling out of control forever? So good game mechanics can invisibly control the play space. Some of them are very visible. Some containers are obviously there. Other containers are a little less so. But ask yourself, what is the built-in timer for this game? What's the longest and shortest it can run? Are the players in charge of that? Can they screw this up? Or is the game going to pretty much end no matter what they do? Chess has a soft timer. You could play chess forever. But it's a bad move on both players' parts to do that. But the real soft timer in chess is as pieces leave the board, more movement is possible. It's easier to make big moves once some of that stuff gets out of the way. That's kind of a soft timer on chess. The soft timer on craps is every time you roll the dice, there's at least a 25% chance the game will end. Could a craps game go on forever? Yes. Will it? No. You just have to pass through that 25% gate over and over again until you finally stop. Poker has a hard timer. You deal, you bet, you're done. It has a fixed number of rounds. It's a super easy way to end a game. Now, in a pure abstract game, it's kind of tricky to end on a fixed number of rounds because then the game sort of feels more solvable. Like if you know exactly how much is left of the game, it takes a little of the fun out of it. So a hard timer like this may not be what you want. That's why chess has the soft timer. And this is a real quote from a real Steve Jackson. To me, something I like about your games, they end. And it was especially meaningful coming from Steve. Let's talk about definitions of fairness, because this is one of those things your team can get in trouble on. A coin flip is fair because each player has an equal chance of winning. A chess game is fair in the sense that nothing external keeps the best player from winning. These are two diametrically opposed definitions of fair. I was working on a console game with a pretty big team. I came into the process halfway through. I didn't design the game. I just helped them get it over the finish line. And I kind of realized halfway through this project that half of the team were trying to make it chess, and half of them were trying to make it a coin flip, and they were never going to settle that unless someone stepped in and said, this is our goal for this game. You know, we're going to do this and this and this because these are our actual goals, and it is more like a coin flip here, and it's more like chess here, but we can't just call it fair because we don't actually know what that means. Balance can mean all kinds of stuff. I want my game to be balanced, but what does that mean? It can mean that everyone has an equal chance of winning, like a coin flip. Again, it can mean like, you know, no external forces are going to screw me up. Balance can also mean there's a mix of equally valid strategies, some high and some low volatility strategies, none of which is dominant, so that people with different personalities can still have a good time and a good chance of winning based on the way they like to play. That's a hard way to balance a game, but that's a big deal. And balance can mean equity between different table positions, different starting positions. There is a horrible imbalance in the table positions in poker, for example. There's an unbalance in the positions in chess, right? People know that white wins more often than black by quite a percentage, and so they still have to balance that out despite it being a purely fair, purely strategy game. So don't chase fairness without knowing what you're chasing. We'll talk about power curves. So we know how, and this is general design here, but think about it in terms of your abstract. A power curve is a way for the game players to get stronger at winning over time. It's so at the beginning of the game, you're just kind of putting along, having a nice time, and by the end of the game, you can kill each other with one stroke because the game has to end. So I think we're most familiar with this in terms of mana curves, CCGs based on Magic, newer CCGs who use sort of a more formulaic power curve, but I have access to more power on every turn so I can do cooler stuff, and eventually this game will end. The metaphor that I came up with, this was back in the Magic days, was to imagine that the game itself is a marble in a bowl, and on every turn we're allowed to poke at it and try to poke it out the other side. But every turn we get to poke a little harder. That's the power curve. The marble is still going to roll back and forth. It's going to go between us. I'm winning, you're winning, I'm winning, but the amount that it goes, the amount that it's pushed on every turn gets a little higher. The power curve can give you a stronger push. It can flatten out the bowl. It can, metaphorically do a lot of different things. When the game forces itself to end, the bowl turns upside down and says, whatever you do to this marble, it's rolling out. I'm done. You guys are done playing now. And you can engineer systems that do that. If you don't have a power curve in your game, you still need a way to force an ending. In an individual hand of poker, it's over because we count to 5. In a session of poker, a session of regular poker doesn't have a forcing function. It doesn't have an end condition. People stop playing poker when they want to stop. That's okay, because you can stop whenever you want. But poker tournaments do trend to conclusion in exactly this way by raising the blinds. And every time you raise the minimum bet, you effectively cut everyone's stack in half. By taking those chips away from the players, they're saying, you guys are going to go home. One way or another, this is turning into a crapshoot, and our dealers need to eat. So that's how a poker tournament flattens that bowl and eventually forces the game to end. So in your game, do players' strengths increase over time? In chess, yes, your strength increases because the availability of moves opens up as the pawns get the hell out of the way. RPGs give more powerful equipment over time. Now, RPGs are sort of steady state environments where the challenge is rising at the same rate as your skill. But this is how they do the power curve in that kind of game. Better monsters, better gear. CCGs use mana curves like we talked about to enable the casting of the playing of bigger and bigger cards. Scrabble puts the high value spaces far away from the center. The more I play, the closer I get to the points. And poker tournaments and chess. We talked about those already. Before we get into tax specifically, I want to take some questions if you want to ask them. I also want to check the time. Yeah, we're doing good. Questions on what we talked about so far? Yeah? No? Yeah?
I didn't have my hand up.
I know, but you did?
You said that something like chess has a power curve because of the amount of availability and movement opens up. But you could also look at it as chess, your power curve goes down because you have less. Right,
yeah. So a lot's going on there, right. You do have more freedom of movement as the pieces diminish, but you also have like a closer, the bowl is also flattening out because there's fewer things you can do and the king is more available to shoot at. So a lot's going on there, but yes, chess definitely has mechanisms that make it end, yeah.
When you're designing abstract games, are you trying to tell a story in the same way that like more thematic games, you're trying to tell a story by integrating mechanics of the team? Or are you trying to like let the players tell their stories through like your abstract?
I think all games are good at letting players tell their own stories. We build an environment in which their stories play out. We give them the tools to write the story. We don't write the story for them. We kind of think of the kinds of stories they're going to be able to tell, and we give them the tools to do it. If you try to deliver a linear story through a game mechanic, and I talk about this actually in one of my other lectures this week, you're going to fail. If you succeed, your game is not a game, it's a story, and people are going to play it once, and then they're going to go do something else. You should have made a movie, right? It's not my job to tell you a specific story. I just want to give you the tools to do light RPG or to find a different place in the chessboard or whatever it is that you're going to do. If you walk away from a game and tell me a story about how it went, that's really exciting to me. But it's not going to be a story that I put in front of you. It's going to be a story you told with the pieces I gave you. Yeah?
So on that note, would you say that game designers are actually more of a curator for game experience as opposed to just creating experience?
I think that's a distinction without a difference. I mean, it's certainly our job to make it possible for that experience to happen. So we make the worlds where it happens, yeah. You know, even on a micro level, even on the level of making a new Connect 4. By the way, the inventor of Connect 4, you know what he says is the best thing about that game? Somebody must know this.
It ends?
Well, it does end, right. It does. It trends to conclusion because you can't take pieces off the board. What's the best part of Connect 4?
If you're going first and you
No. What's the best part of Connect 4? No. Yes. Yes. The latch at the bottom. The latch at the bottom that lets all the pieces drop out. He's like, this game without that is garbage. Like this hard reset is the thing that just makes you want to play again. All right. I've got about 5 minutes for TAC. Let's talk about this. TAC was described in Patrick Rothfuss's book, not the Name of the Wind, the Wise Man's Fear, right? And this is what I started with. Click to add text. I started with nothing, right? The book is intelligently vague about how this game works. It says it's wonderful. It says it's a two-player abstract with pieces on a board. It doesn't say how long it takes, how you win, what you're doing. Thank you, Patrick Rothfuss, for taking all those details out of the book so that we could actually make him a good game. Because if you've ever had to, if you're one of the 40 game designers in the world who's had to make Quidditch into a playable experience, we feel sorry for each other, right? So there it is, the Wise Man's Fear. Here's what we know from the book. We know that it's a beautiful strategy game. It's a two-player abstract with stones on a board. It has similarities to chess or shogi or go, but only in the most abstract sense. Patrick actually tried to make this game because just like me in high school, I wrote a fantasy story and it had a chess variant at its center. I finished the game. I did not finish the book. So, game designer. Patrick tried to make a game and failed horribly. In fact, as he tells it, he played it a few times and it was always a tie. And so he was like, okay, this time you try to win and I'm going to try to lose. It was still a tie. And he's like, there's more to this game design thing than I was told. He did send me some extra notes. Pieces can stack to combine powers. Now, what was in his head was what game designers typically invent when they're children. Stacking chess, you stack a rook on a bishop and it makes a queen. Like you take all the abilities and you just merge them together. That's a cool idea, but it gets complicated really fast. But I like the idea of stacking up pieces to make a stronger piece in a more general way. Each player has their own differently shaped stones, which they curate and bring to the match. Some of them can stand up, some of them cannot, some of them can balance, some of them not. There is a dexterity element. Notice my editorial question mark. Typically, abstract strategy games do not have dexterity elements. They are somewhat antithetical. We're not talking about dice rolling here even. We're talking about how good can you stack up the Jenga pieces. And that is a whole different kind of game. So I talked him out of that, thank God. The King Killer Chronicle is in a pre-industrial fantasy world. It has ancient roads marked with megaliths, as we mentioned before. Some of them have fallen down. And we know it's an ancient game played on a board with stones, and absolutely fits into our definition of a traditional abstract game. Simple pieces, simple rules, iterative gameplay, and open information. I think we didn't have no randomness as a definite, but we definitely, that was a probable, considering all of the related games that we were using as benchmarks. The first playable probably took about 3 weeks. I got Patrick's brief in December, and I saw him on a cruise ship in February. So the first 3 weeks were real rough development. The second 5 weeks were iterating and honing the stuff that we liked, with the design goal of make a beautiful game, right? Nothing in there about any of what I just said. None of the mechanics, none of the backstory stuff. It's going to be beautiful when we're done with it. People are going to enjoy the idea of having played, a good-looking game better than min-maxing their moves. Players did have their own sets of stones. Some of them could stand up, some of them couldn't, and you would curate that set. And yeah, we tried it. We tried the dexterity component. We decided we hated it. Players capture territory by placing stones. It's a lot like Go. So you start with a blank board, you put stuff out there, and when the board is full, you know you're done, you count your stones, you see who won. We play tested that a little bit. What we decided was, instead of telling someone, pick how many standing stones are in your deck, I kind of decided that was a really modern approach. It's deck building, it's Magic the Gathering, right? It isn't really how, in my experience, ancient games are set up. I have the pieces in a bag, sure, but it's not like my pieces that I curated. Instead, I'm going to decide how many standing stones I have by playing the same piece in different orientation. So that's where standing stones flat and upright came from. When you're playing to capture territory, the game isn't over till it's over. It isn't even close till it's over. And so we tried something quicker, more like tic-tac-toe. All right, let's take the road building and make that into the game objective. So this shortly became the goal, to make a road that connects opposite sides of the board. We took out the customization, we took out the dexterity part. And the stacking of pieces was accomplished by mechanics that I was pretty familiar with. I'd already done a game called Veritas and another game called Devil Bunny Hates the Earth, which you may remember, which were all sort of based on Mancala. But the order of the stacks that are generated also has relevance. So as you pick up a stack, you move it, you cover other pieces, and that creates new and bigger stacks. It was the specific rules for that movement that wound up being crucial to the evolution of the gameplay. How many pieces can I drop at each point? Can I change directions at each point? What happens when I reach the edge? Questions like that I all have multiple answers, and it was settling on the right answers to those questions that gave us the iteration and design space that we wanted. Not too complicated, because if a stack can move in any direction on any turn, it's too hard to look ahead. You can't plan ahead, you can't control what the other guy can do. And if it's too restrictive, then you wind up with, again, edge cases like you can't, if you run a stack to the edge of the board, it can't keep running, so then what does it do? We did add one high-value piece that does a lot of cool stuff, the capstone. Its limitation is there's only one of it. It's really just kind of red meat. Like, I threw it in there because I thought gamers would like it, and it works fine. But that's literally the reason that there's a capstone in TAC, is that I thought just the flat stone game wasn't cool enough. And taking a note from Go, instead of fixing a board size, we said actually the game can be played on different sizes of boards. 4x4, 5x5, 6x6 are all sort of like acceptable sizes. I play tested 3x3 a lot. Like, it isn't tic-tac-toe, but it's close, but it was still like, I carry this around, I'm gonna play 3x3, let's see if it's any good. And then 7's an unlucky number, so we talk about 8x8, but in the King Killer Chronicles, there's 7x7 is like, we don't talk about that. And there she is, the final result. It does have a highly variable game state with a small number of pieces. The biggest deal is those pieces in a stack, the order of the pieces in the stack tells you what that stack can do. Tells you how far it can go, tells you what it's going to be able to lay out when it runs, and that answers Patrick's need to say, I want to make a powerful, taller stack that does cooler stuff than the shorter stacks around it. The variation of the game states comes from iteration. The game really turns into one about Sente. It's very close to over for most of the game. You are 1 or 2 moves away from winning for most of the game, and that's exciting to me because I don't want to wait until the end to take score. I want to be like, oh, you're almost won. I got to fix that. It debatably makes good on the promise of a beautiful game. It does what we wanted it to do. And the takeaway from that experience is there are still all kinds of unexplored spaces in this category. TAC feels like a game that's existed for 500 years. That was the goal, and that was the result. But it's not the only thing that we can do. A very famous game designer wrote a book of dice games in which he said that any dice game that can be made already has been made. I want to punch him through the pages. I think that's a stupid idea. To say that is just not to be very creative. And I hope that you all go out there and invent the next greatest, bestest abstract strategy games in this space. So I've got time for maybe just one more question. Sir.
Do you find it more difficult to create abstract strategy games with multiple player options versus just 2-player?
If it's pure abstract, 4-player chess is kind of dull. In my humble opinion, I think that there's so much waiting between my turns. I don't typically like a pure abstract that's 4 players. So if it's a multiplayer game, I want it to run faster. I want the turns to be simultaneous, or I want them to be a much shorter game. Poker is a good example of a game with a really compressed time, and if you're out of it, you're back in a couple of minutes. So that's, I haven't done, I can't think of any, well, it's a big catalog, but I can't think of any like multiplayer pure strategy games that I've done off the top of my head. So yeah, I just haven't really tackled the space. I'm sort of afraid of it, maybe. Yeah.
What is Sente?
It is a term from Go. It means advantage or tempo. It's like I'm one step ahead of you.
Gotcha.
Yeah.
Thank you.
All right. Sure.
You talked in the beginning about how abstract strategy, traditional abstract, is a hard place to make money.
Yeah.
And you've had a long career, so how have you balanced your love for this?
I don't make them. But no, so seriously, when I talk about abstract strategy games being not a good way to make money, most of the pure abstracts that I've written have been given away for free. I've done games like Queensland, which is sort of you place pieces on the board and move them around kind of game. It's fairly comparable to some ancient Egyptian games. By and large, the pure abstracts that I've done, I have not tried to turn into marketable products. So the things that I market are more like in the category of Cheapass Games, where they have a story and a hook on the box and a reason you're going to play, and sort of an appeal to a lighter beer and pretzels kind of a family game night. TAC is exceptional because it had a player base installed before it existed. So it was possible for us to reach out to them and bring them to a Kickstarter campaign, have the crowd before the funding, as they say. This was a great opportunity for me to work super extra hard on this particular game. But typically, I don't even think about trying to take a game like this to retail. Yeah?
So thinking about a lot of like non-abstract games, a lot of them are like, bigger games nowadays have like the end on like turn 10 or whatever, right? Just curious, because I found this idea of like using the mechanisms to end the game very interesting. I hadn't thought about that. How do you feel like that applies to like non-abstract? Do you think that they're missing opportunities there, or do you think there's a fundamental reason you don't want to do that there?
I mean, to discuss missed opportunities in the general space of game design would take longer than the 30 seconds I have left. But maybe we can talk a little bit more about it after. It's a complicated question. And I do believe that I am out of time. I will take this last one. No, let's have it. Make it quick.
Yes, I was wondering, for playtesting on the abstract games,
Yeah.
what have you, would you suggest have just as raw spectrum as possible, or would you trust someone like yourself?
Good segue. I have a game about. I have a lecture about iteration and playtesting and game design as a follow-up to this tomorrow. So come to that, and that will be the answer. Thank you all very much for coming. Very nice.